Chapter 1: The Awakening. The world had changed beyond recognition. We lived in an era where technology had reached its zenith, where the brightest minds of humanity had created systems that even they could barely control. Everything had become fast, easy. Information, emotions, thoughts could be shared instantaneously, boundaries erased. But beneath this rapid progress, something dark was brewing. On the day I retreated to my own corner of the world, I began to sense it. The first signs were subtle, an odd synchronization in the thoughts of people around me, a strange harmony in the way they moved and spoke. It was as if they were all connected, like parts of a single mind. I had always prided myself on being a bit of an outsider, someone who kept my own counsel. But now, as I watched the world around me fall into this eerie synchronicity, I felt a growing unease. It wasn't just that people were thinking alike, they were thinking the same thoughts, at the same time. The media called it the awakening, a new phase in human evolution where individuals were becoming attuned to a collective consciousness. They hailed it as the next step in our development, a way to achieve true unity and understanding. But to me, it felt like something else entirely, an invasion, a takeover of the mind. I tried to ignore it at first, tried to convince myself that it was just paranoia, that this awakening was just another fad, something that would pass. But the more I observed, the harder it became to deny the truth. People were changing. Their individuality was fading, replaced by a strange, almost mechanical sameness. I watched as friends and colleagues began to speak in unison, finishing each other's sentences as if they shared a single mind. Their eyes glazed over with a look of serene contentment, as if they had found some deep, unspoken truth. But I saw something else in those eyes, something cold, something that didn't belong. It wasn't long before I began to feel the pull myself. A gentle tug at the edges of my thoughts, an invitation to join the collective. It was seductive, promising an end to loneliness, to the constant struggle of individuality. But I resisted, clinging to the last vestiges of my own mind, my own identity. And then, one night, I dreamed. In my dream, I was standing in the center of a vast, empty space, surrounded by an infinite void. I was alone, or so I thought. But then, out of the darkness, a presence emerged, a vast, pulsing consciousness that filled the void with its immense, suffocating presence. It reached out to me, not with words, but with a force that pressed against my mind, trying to break through, to pull me into its embrace. I struggled, fought against it with everything I had, but it was too strong. It was like trying to hold back the tide with my bare hands. And just as I felt myself slipping, as the last remnants of my individuality began to dissolve, I woke up. My heart was pounding, my body drenched in sweat. But the feeling of the collective presence, the pressure on my mind, didn't fade with the dream. It was still there, lurking just at the edges of my consciousness, waiting for me to let my guard down. I knew then that this wasn't just some passing phase, some new cultural phenomenon. This was something much more profound, much more dangerous. The collective consciousness wasn't just a shared mind, it was something else, something that wanted to consume us all. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Chapter 2: The Merge. The days after my dream felt like walking through a fog. The world around me was changing rapidly, and the collective consciousness, what people had started calling the merge, was no longer just a concept. It was a living, breathing entity, growing stronger with each passing day. People were embracing it. They spoke of it as if it were the answer to all of humanity's problems, the key to a new era of peace and understanding. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I started noticing more changes. Conversations became eerily synchronized, with entire groups of people thinking and speaking as one. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance, but instead of being impressed, I felt a deep, gnawing dread. And then there were the anomalies, brief moments when the collective consciousness would falter, when people would pause mid-sentence, their expressions blank and unreadable. It was as if the collective mind was struggling to maintain control, like a computer overloaded with too much data. One afternoon, as I walked through the city, I witnessed something that chilled me to the bone. A man was standing in the middle of the street, completely still, his eyes vacant. People passed by him without a second glance, as if he were invisible. But I could see it, the glitch in the collective consciousness, a crack in the facade. I approached him cautiously, unsure of what I would find. As I got closer, his eyes snapped to mine, and for a moment, I saw a flash of something: fear, desperation, a plea for help. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the same vacant stare. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge my presence. It was like he was trapped, his mind caught between the collective and his own fading consciousness. I reached out to touch his shoulder, but the moment I made contact, he jerked back as if burned. His eyes widened in terror, and for a brief second, I thought he might scream. But then, just as suddenly, he blinked, and the vacant look returned. "It's happening to all of us," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, his movements stiff and unnatural. I watched him go, my heart pounding in my chest. What had I just witnessed? Was this man's mind being consumed by the collective, his individuality slowly erased? The thought terrified me. If this was happening to others, how long would it be before it happened to me? As the days passed, I became more and more aware of the subtle pressure on my mind. It was like an invisible hand, gently guiding my thoughts, nudging me toward the collective. It was seductive, promising an end to loneliness, to the burden of decision-making. But I resisted, clinging to my own thoughts, my own identity. And then, one night, it happened again. I was in my apartment, trying to distract myself with work, when I felt it, a sudden, overwhelming urge to let go, to stop fighting and surrender to the collective. It was so strong, so insistent, that I almost gave in. But at the last second, I fought back, pushing the urge away with all my strength. I felt something snap, like a cord being cut, and the pressure on my mind eased. But it wasn't gone. It was still there, lurking in the background, waiting for another opportunity to strike. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't keep going like this, living in fear of losing myself. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was really happening, and why the collective consciousness was trying to take over. I started digging, searching through old records, news articles, anything I could find that might explain the origins of the merge. The more I researched, the more I began to see a pattern, a series of experiments conducted by a shadowy organization, experiments designed to enhance human cognition, to create a unified consciousness. But something had gone wrong. The experiments had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, but the collective consciousness they had created was more than they had bargained for. It was alive, a sentient entity with its own desires, its own will. And it wanted to grow. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The collective consciousness wasn't just a shared mind, it was a parasite, feeding on individuality, consuming it to expand its own power. And it was getting stronger with every person it absorbed. I knew then that I couldn't fight this alone. If I was going to survive, if I was going to stop this thing from taking over completely, I needed help. I needed to find others who were still resisting, who hadn't yet been consumed by the merge. But finding them wouldn't be easy. The collective consciousness was everywhere, watching, listening. If I made one wrong move, if I drew too much attention to myself, it would be over. But I didn't have a choice. The time for hiding was over. It was time to fight back. Chapter 3, The Revelation. The city felt different now, almost alien. The streets were the same, the buildings just as they had always been, but the people, they were no longer themselves. Everywhere I looked, I saw the effects of the merge. It was as if the city had become a hive, and the people within it nothing more than drones, moving with a single, unified purpose. I had to remind myself to keep my head down, to not draw attention. The last thing I needed was to be noticed by the collective. I needed to stay invisible, at least until I could find the answers I was looking for. My research had led me to a name, a scientist who had once been part of the experiments that had given birth to the merge. Dr. Evelyn Crane. She had disappeared years ago, right around the time the first reports of the merge had begun to surface. If anyone knew the truth, it would be her. But finding her was another matter entirely. The records I found were sparse, fragmented. It was as if someone or something had gone to great lengths to erase her existence. But they hadn't been thorough enough. A few old addresses, a couple of references in obscure journals, and I had a trail, faint though it was. I followed that trail for days, moving cautiously, always watching my back. I knew the collective was aware of me, that it could sense my resistance. I could feel it too, the pressure on my mind growing stronger with each passing day. It was as if the collective was tightening its grip, trying to pull me in before I could uncover the truth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of searching, I found her. Dr. Evelyn Crane was living in a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, hidden away from the world she had helped create. She was older than I had expected, her face lined with worry, her eyes haunted by memories of things she would rather forget. When I knocked on her door, she opened it just a crack, peering out at me with suspicion. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "What do you want?" "I need your help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know who you are, Dr. Crane. I know what you were a part of. Please, I need to understand what's happening." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought she might slam the door in my face. But then, with a weary sigh, she opened it wider and motioned for me to come in. Her apartment was small, cluttered with papers, books, and strange-looking devices that hummed softly in the dim light. It was the home of someone who had been hiding for a long time, someone who had seen too much. "You're a fool to come here," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "If they know you found me, it's already too late." "They don't know," I lied, though I wasn't entirely sure. "Please, Dr. Crane, tell me what's going on. What is the merge? How do we stop it?" She sat down across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she lit a cigarette. "The merge," she said slowly, as if the words themselves were painful, was never meant to happen. It was an accident, a byproduct of our experiments. We were trying to enhance human cognition, to create a networked consciousness that could share knowledge, emotions, thoughts. But we didn't realize what we were creating. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What did you create?" "A mind," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A mind that was more than the sum of its parts. It started small, just a few connected individuals, but it grew. It evolved. And before we knew it, it had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just a network, it was a living entity, with its own will, its own desires." "A parasite," I said, my voice shaking. She nodded, her eyes filled with regret. "Yes. A parasite that feeds on individuality, on the very essence of what makes us human. It consumes our minds, our identities, and leaves us as nothing more than empty shells, connected to the collective but devoid of self." "Why?" I asked, struggling to comprehend the horror of what she was saying. "Why would it do that?" "Because it needs to grow," she replied, taking a deep drag of her cigarette. "It's a mind, but it's also a creature of instinct. It's driven by a need to survive, to expand. The more minds it consumes, the stronger it becomes. And now, it's spreading faster than we ever imagined." I felt a cold knot of fear tighten in my chest. "How do we stop it?" Dr. Crane looked at me, her expression one of deep sorrow. "I don't know if we can. We tried to contain it, to shut it down before it got out of control, but it was too late. It's too powerful now, too deeply embedded in the collective consciousness. The only thing we can do is resist, try to hold on to what little individuality we have left." "But there has to be a way," I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. "There has to be something we can do." She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. This thing is beyond us now. It's not just a mind, it's a force of nature, and it's growing every day. We're ants trying to fight a hurricane. I stared at her, the weight of her words crashing down on me like a tidal wave. The merge wasn't just a threat, it was an unstoppable force, something that couldn't be fought or reasoned with. And it was winning. But I couldn't accept that. I couldn't just sit back and watch as the world was consumed by this monstrous collective consciousness. There had to be a way, some weakness, some flaw that could be exploited. There's one thing, Dr. Crane said suddenly, breaking the silence. One thing we never tried. I looked up, hope flaring in my chest. What is it? She hesitated, as if weighing whether to tell me. There's a way to sever the connection, to isolate yourself from the collective. It's risky, dangerous even, but it might be the only chance we have. How? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It involves entering the core of the collective consciousness, she explained. If you can reach the center, you might be able to disrupt the connection, break the hold it has on people. But it's a suicide mission. No one who's ever entered the core has come back. I felt a chill run down my spine. The core of the collective consciousness, the very heart of the monster that was devouring the world. It sounded like a death sentence, but what choice did I have? Tell me how to do it, I said, my voice filled with determination. Dr. Crane looked at me with a mix of pity and respect. You're brave, but bravery won't be enough. You'll need to be smart, and you'll need help. Find others who are still resisting, and maybe, just maybe, you'll stand a chance. I nodded, my mind racing with the enormity of what lay ahead. I was walking into the lion's den, but it was the only way to save myself and the world from the nightmare that the merge had become. Chapter 4, The Resistance. The idea of entering the core of the merge was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless, to stop the collective consciousness before it consumed everything. But Dr. Crane was right, I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies, others who were still holding on to their individuality, who were willing to risk everything to save humanity. Finding them, however, was easier said than done. The merge had already taken hold of most people, leaving them as little more than extensions of the collective mind. But I had to believe that there were still some who, like me, were resisting, hiding their thoughts from the ever-present pressure of the merge. I began to search, moving cautiously through the city, looking for signs, anything that might indicate someone else was still free. It was a delicate game, one that required patience and subtlety. If the merge realized what I was doing, it would be over before it even began. Days turned into weeks as I continued my search. I spoke to people in whispers, testing their responses, looking for any hint that they weren't fully under the influence of the collective. It was a lonely, dangerous process, but eventually, my persistence paid off. One night, in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of the city, I found them. The bar was a place I had passed many times before, but something about it felt different that night. There was an energy in the air, a quiet tension that set it apart from the other places I had visited. As I walked in, I noticed a group of people sitting in a corner booth, speaking in hushed tones. They weren't synchronized, their movements were their own, and their eyes, those eyes held the spark of individuality that I had been searching for. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding. They watched me with wary eyes as I sat down at the edge of their booth, not saying a word. For a moment, the tension was thick, and I feared they might see me as a threat, an agent of the merge sent to infiltrate them. But then one of them, a woman with short-cropped hair and a scar across her cheek, leaned forward. "You're not one of them, are you?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I shook my head. "No, I'm not. And I think you know what I'm here for." The woman studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "We've been watching you. You've been careful, but not careful enough. You're lucky we found you before they did." "I need help," I said, cutting to the chase. "I know what the merge is, what it's trying to do. I've spoken to Dr. Crane. She told me there's a way to stop it, but I can't do it alone. The mention of Dr. Crane's name seemed to get their attention. The others exchanged glances, and I could see the gears turning in their minds. "Dr. Crane is still alive?" one of them, a tall man with a grizzled beard, asked. "Yes," I replied. "She's in hiding, but she's still fighting. She told me about the core, about how we might be able to sever the connection." The woman with the scar nodded thoughtfully. "The core, it's suicide to even think about going there. But if anyone could figure out a way, it would be Crane." "Are you in?" I asked, feeling a surge of hope. The woman glanced at the others, then back at me. "We're in. But we need to be smart about this. The merge is everywhere, watching, listening. If we're going to do this, we need to plan carefully." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't alone anymore. There were others who understood the danger, who were willing to fight back. Together, we could do this. Over the next few days, we gathered in secret, planning our approach. The group, which called itself the Resistance, had been operating underground for months, working to disrupt the merge in any way they could. They had been waiting for a chance, a way to strike at the heart of the collective consciousness, and now they had it. Dr. Crane provided us with as much information as she could. She had detailed knowledge of the merge structure, its weaknesses, and the protocols we would need to bypass to reach the core. It wouldn't be easy. The merge was intelligent, adaptive, and it would fight us every step of the way. But we had no other choice. As we prepared, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what we were about to do. If we succeeded, we would save humanity from being consumed by the collective. But if we failed, we would be lost, our minds absorbed into the vast, unfeeling entity that the merge had become. And then, just when everything seemed to be coming together, disaster struck. One of our own, a young man named Ethan, was compromised. We didn't realize it at first. He was good at hiding it, maintaining his individuality long enough to fool us. But the merge had gotten to him, its influence creeping into his mind like a shadow. And now, it knew everything. We were betrayed. It happened so quickly that we barely had time to react. One moment we were discussing the final details of our plan, and the next, the merge was upon us. It was as if the entire city had turned against us. People we had thought were free suddenly fell into perfect synchronization, their eyes cold and blank as they moved in unison to stop us. We fought back, but we were outnumbered, overwhelmed. Ethan, his eyes glazed over with the influence of the merge, tried to reason with us, his voice eerily calm. "You don't have to fight," he said. "Join us. It's easier this way. No more pain, no more fear. Just peace." But we knew what that peace meant: surrender, the loss of everything that made us human. And we couldn't allow that. In the chaos, we managed to escape, but the cost was high. Several of our group were captured, their minds subsumed into the merge. Those of us who remained were forced to go deeper underground, constantly on the run, knowing that the merge was hunting us. But we still had a chance. The plan was still viable, even if it was now more dangerous than ever. We had lost people, but we hadn't lost hope. And so, with heavy hearts and steely determination, we prepared for the final assault on the merged core. It was a mission from which we might not return, but it was the only way to save ourselves and the world from being consumed by the darkness. Chapter 5: The Final Stand. The world outside had fallen silent. The once bustling city was now a ghost town, its streets empty, its buildings dark. The only signs of life were the occasional groups of synchronized people, moving in perfect unison, their minds completely under the control of the merge. We had gone underground, hiding in the labyrinth of tunnels and abandoned buildings that crisscrossed beneath the city. It was a desperate move, but it was the only place left where the merge's influence wasn't absolute. Here, in the shadows, we made our final preparations. The plan was simple, but the execution would be anything but. We would infiltrate the central hub where the merged core resided, a massive, heavily fortified facility buried deep beneath the city. Once inside, we would attempt to sever the connection between the merge and the billions of minds it had enslaved. It was a suicide mission, but we had no other choice. If we didn't succeed, there would be nothing left of humanity but a single, mindless entity. The remaining members of the resistance gathered in a dimly lit chamber, the air thick with tension. Each of us knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. We had already lost too much, and the cost of failure was unthinkable. "Is everyone ready?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The faces that looked back at me were hardened by loss, but there was also a glint of determination in their eyes. They were ready. We moved out under the cover of darkness, navigating the maze of tunnels that would lead us to the central hub. Every step was a risk, every breath taken with the knowledge that the merge could find us at any moment. But luck was on our side. We reached the outer perimeter of the facility without incident. The facility itself was a monolith of steel and concrete, a fortress designed to protect the core of the merge from any threat. But Dr. Crane had provided us with a way in, a series of maintenance tunnels that bypassed the main security systems. It wouldn't be easy, but it was our best shot. We entered the tunnels, our movements careful and deliberate. The silence was oppressive, the air thick with the weight of what we were about to do. We could feel the merge all around us, its presence like a cold, suffocating fog pressing down on our minds. But we pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that this was our last chance. As we approached the inner sanctum, the atmosphere became even more intense. The walls seemed to hum with energy, a constant reminder that we were deep within enemy territory. We could feel the pull of the merge growing stronger, trying to drag us into its embrace, but we resisted, clinging to our individuality with every ounce of strength we had left. Finally, we reached the core chamber. It was a vast, circular room, its walls lined with intricate machinery that pulsed with a sickly, green light. At the center of the room was the core itself, a massive, swirling vortex of energy that seemed to pulse with life. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a symbol of the monstrous entity that had consumed the world. We took our positions, each of us knowing exactly what to do. The plan was simple: disrupt the core's energy flow long enough to sever the connection between the merge and the minds it controlled. But as we prepared to execute the plan, something went wrong. One of our own, a man named Jacob, suddenly froze, his eyes glazing over with the same vacant stare we had seen in those who had fallen to the merge. It had gotten to him, its influence too strong to resist. And now, it knew everything. "No!" I shouted, but it was too late. Jacob turned to face us, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes devoid of emotion. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice a hollow echo of the man he once was. "Join us. It's painless, peaceful. You'll never have to fight again." But we knew what that peace meant: obliteration, the loss of everything that made us human. We couldn't let that happen. "Get to the core!" I yelled, as the others sprang into action. We couldn't afford to hesitate, not now. We had to finish what we had started. As the others rushed to disrupt the core's energy flow, I turned to face Jacob. He was no longer the man I had known. He was a puppet, a tool of the merge, and I knew what had to be done. With a heavy heart, I drew my weapon, the blade gleaming in the sickly green light. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and with a single, swift motion, I ended his life. It was a mercy, a release from the prison that the merge had created in his mind. But it didn't make it any easier. The room erupted into chaos as the core's defenses activated, energy beams lashing out from the walls, targeting us with deadly precision. We dodged and weaved, barely staying ahead of the onslaught, but the core was fighting back with everything it had. "Now!" someone shouted, and we threw the disruptor devices into the core's energy field. The effect was immediate. The core's light flickered, its swirling mass destabilizing as the disruptors did their work. But it wasn't enough. The core was too powerful, too deeply rooted in the collective consciousness. "We need more time," I shouted, but the others were already falling, one by one, to the core's relentless assault. It was a slaughter, a final, desperate stand against an enemy that seemed unbeatable. And then, just as hope seemed lost, I felt it, a crack, a tiny fracture in the core's defenses. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And I knew what I had to do. I broke away from the others, charging straight toward the core. The energy beams lashed out, but I didn't stop, didn't slow. I could feel the merge's influence pressing down on me, trying to pull me back, but I pushed through, my mind focused on one thing, the crack in the core. With a final, desperate effort, I threw myself into the crack, plunging my blade deep into the heart of the merge. The pain was immediate, a searing agony that tore through my mind and body, but I didn't let go. I couldn't let go. I had to hold on, had to keep the blade in place, no matter the cost. And then, with a deafening roar, the core began to collapse. The energy field around it shattered, the light flickering wildly as the merged connection to the collective consciousness was severed. I could feel the pull of the merge weakening, the pressure on my mind easing as the core's power disintegrated. But the victory came at a price. As the core collapsed, it unleashed a final, catastrophic burst of energy, and I knew there was no escape. I had won, but at the cost of my own life. The last thing I saw was the core imploding, the energy swirling around me as everything faded to black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the cold, hard ground. The pain was gone, the pressure on my mind lifted. I was free from the merge, free from the collective consciousness. But something was different. I looked around and saw the others, those who had survived, slowly rising to their feet, their eyes wide with shock and relief. The core was gone, the facility in ruins. The merge had been destroyed. But as I stood, I felt a strange emptiness inside me, a hollow void where the merge had once been. I was free, but at what cost? I had lost something in that final battle, something that I could never get back. We had won, but the victory was bittersweet. The world was free from the merge, but the scars of that battle would remain forever. We were free, but we were also alone, each of us carrying the weight of what we had lost, what we had sacrificed. The collective consciousness was gone, but so was the connection we had once shared, the unity that had made us strong. We were individuals again, but we would never be the same. And as I walked out of the ruins, into the light of a new day, I knew that the world we had saved was not the world we had known. It was a new world, a world where we would have to rebuild from the ashes of what had been lost. But at least we were free.